Welcome to the Servant Leaders Mindset Podcast, where we are changing lives through servant leaders. Up next.
And he starts yelling, "You made me do this, you made me do this," and he fires at my mother. And I start screaming, "What are you doing, Dad? What are you doing? Stop." And he cocks the gun a second time, points the gun at me, and I absolutely believe I'm next. He blinks, I blink, he blinks, I blink. We're frozen in time. And my mother, literally with her last breath, screams out, "No, don't." And with that scream, my father realizes my mother is still alive and takes that bullet intended for me and shoots my mother a second time. And that second bullet goes through my mother's abdomen, out her back, lands on the car horn. And for the next 20 minutes, all I hear is, and then my father cocks the gun a third time, puts the gun to his head and fires. So in a matter of less than 2 minutes, I was the sole witness of watching my father murder my mother and commit suicide in front of me.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to my very special guest, Miss Rhonda Britten. She is an Emmy Award winner, repeated guest on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and she has also produced 600 episodes of a reality television show, authored 4 bestsellers, including her seminal work, Fearless Living. She has appeared as the head life coach on the hit daytime NBC series titled Starting Over. The New York Times has heralded her as America's favorite life coach. Rhonda brings the neuroscience of fear down to earth, and she has been read, heard, and watched by millions. Welcome to the show, Rhonda, and more and more and more, but we don't have time to go through all that. She is amazing. So to start out, I'd like to talk about, I would like for you to share your origin story, because it's really important that people know where you came from and how that, particularly your origin story as it relates to your life's traumas, and how that led you to become such a successful person, or the person that you are today.
Well, I love that question. And, one of the things that I believe is that our worst days of our life actually have the seeds of our destiny. And of course, we don't know it at the time, right? We don't know it at the time. During those worst days, we're like, "Oh, no, no." But when we can look back on it, we can draw a line from the worst days of our lives to when we do start rising up. It's a direct line to us fulfilling our mission, to live our purpose, to be that person that we're meant to be. So what you're referring to is the worst day of my life, which is when I was 14 years old. And I grew up in a little tiny town in Upper Michigan, 365 inches of snow a year, 2 restaurants, Douglas Buffet Hotel and Big Boy. We didn't have any McDonald's. That was an hour and a half away. That was a big deal when you went down there. But we grew up in a little town, and my parents had recently divorced, and my father was coming to take us out for Sunday brunch. And so he comes knocking at the door. My mom and I are in her bedroom, and she's puffing up her beehive hairdo and putting on her blue eyeshadow and putting on a rose-colored lipstick. And he comes in the back door, and he goes, "Come on, girls, let's go, let's go, let's go," because that's what dads do. My 2 sisters are fighting it out in our one bathroom, and they're just having it out. And as me and my mom start walking towards the back door to greet my dad, he notices it's starting to rain. And so he says he has to get his coat from the car. Now, this coat was a tan Naugahyde leisure suit coat, which, if you're old enough to remember, that was pretty looking hot with his polyester pants. You know what I'm talking about, right, Dr. Lena? You know what I'm talking about. So he looked hot. So he goes out to the trunk. Me and my mom start walking out. My sister's still in the bathroom fighting it out. And as my father lifts his trunk, I notice out of the corner of my eye that he's not grabbing a coat, but he's grabbing a gun. And he starts yelling, "You made me do this, you made me do this," and he fires at my mother. And I start screaming, "What are you doing, Dad? What are you doing? Stop." And he cocks the gun a second time, points the gun at me, and I absolutely believe I'm next. He blinks, I blink, he blinks, I blink. We're frozen in time. And my mother, literally with her last breath, screams out, "No, don't." And with that scream, my father realizes my mother is still alive and takes that bullet intended for me and shoots my mother a second time. And that second bullet goes through my mother's abdomen, out her back, lands in the car horn. And for the next 20 minutes, all I hear is, and then my father cocks the gun a third time, puts the gun to his head and fires. So in a matter of less than 2 minutes, I was the sole witness of watching my father murder my mother and commit suicide in front of me. Now, I don't know how people would respond, but this is how I responded. It was my fault because I was the only physical one out there that I could physically have stopped it. Like, right, I didn't grab the gun. I didn't kick him in the shins. I didn't jump in front of my mother. I did nothing heroic. I just screamed, "Stop, Dad, stop." And so from that moment, I like to say that I split in two. The outside Rhonda, who's a good girl, straight A student, I'm fine, no, I'm fine, no, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. And the inside Rhonda, who had so much guilt, so much shame, so much humiliation, so much confidence destroyed, esteem destroyed. I just did not have a right to live, right? I did not have a right to exist. And because I didn't save my mother, because by the way, when you watch your mother die, happiness is off the table. Mm-hmm. So for the next 20 years, I found alcohol, and that was lovely at the time, right? Numbing out my feelings. I went and got 3 DUIs, and then I tried to kill myself 3 times. Mm. And it was that third suicide attempt, Dr. Lena, that I realized something, that I'm not very good at killing myself. I'm not skilled at it. But more importantly, I realized there had to be a reason I was staying alive. Now, when you try to kill yourself 3 times, they do put you in a psychiatric ward for evaluation. So I did get put away for a few days, and they deemed me not crazy. They released me, let me go home. And when I got home, I just remember this overwhelming feeling of just a feeling of just hopelessness, because here I wasn't dying. And for the last, since my parents died, like I said, I'd split in two. I wasn't all alcohol, DUIs, and suicide. I was also a self-help junkie and a personal development. I was going to therapy. I was going to workshops. I was reading books. I mean, I read my first self-help book when I was 12. I was going to be a minister when I was 13. So here I was, and I did all this work, and I had a lot of tools and a lot of knowledge, but I still had the feeling that there was something wrong with me, that fundamentally there was something wrong with me. So no matter how much I learned, no matter how much I studied, no matter how much I read, no matter how much therapy I went to, I still felt like there was something wrong with me. And so I remember when I got back to my house, I just felt so defeated. I remember thinking to myself, I have to start over. I just have to start over because I'm not dying. I'm not dying. So I better figure out how to live. And I remember thinking to myself, well, what do they do in kindergarten? Well, they get a calendar and gold stars. So I actually went to the store, got a calendar, got some gold stars. And for the next 30 days, I gave myself a gold star for anything that I did well. I mean, even just the littlest thing. And we're talking about got angry and didn't break anything, or had a drink and didn't get drunk. That's the level I was at. But at the end of 30 days, I had a calendar filled with gold stars. And that calendar started representing hope for me, that I could move forward, that I could discover the reason I was here, that I could, become more true to myself. I didn't know how yet, but that calendar started giving me hope. And that started me on the journey, the next phase of my journey, that eventually ended up me doing what I do today.
Wow. That's an amazing story. It really is. And trauma is a very interesting thing in terms of trying to rewrite it once it happens. Keep reliving. I was wondering, too, in terms of, you said you did go for help, for clinical help. In addition to that, how were you able to rewrite? I understand that you talked about the gold stars and so on, but trauma is a thing that is always triggered. So how did you get out of trigger mode?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is until you do rewrite the story, until you create a new meaning around it, until you change the filter around it. So, the way that I changed my filter is I started, I forgave my parents. That's the first thing. I forgave my father.
Excellent, yeah.
And I forgave first of all, my father was the easiest to forgive, by the way. My mother was harder to forgive. I know that even though she's the innocent victim, I had to take her off her pedestal, right? Because all those years I was drinking and all those years I was suiciding and DUIing, she was the innocent victim. She was like, why? I was like, why? Why her, right? Why? She did nothing, like, so I kept her as the innocent victim, and I needed to take her off the pedestal and see her as a woman, see her as a flesh and bone woman, and recognize, did my mother do something to make my father pull out that gun? No, of course not. But my mother also compromised herself and stayed in that relationship, right? She stayed in the relationship when she knew she should leave. My father tried to strangle me when I was 12. She didn't take me out of the house, didn't kick him out of the house, right? So my mother, out of her own fear, right? Just like my father, I believe my father killed my mother out of fear. And I believe my mother, out of her own fear, compromised herself like we all do. But I had to see that. I had to take the getting off that pedestal in order to see who she was, in order to see her accurately. And then lastly, I forgave myself. And forgiving myself was the most difficult of all, because again, I was the one that survived. I was the one that could have done something. I'm the one that didn't do anything, right? So to see my own, as what I call it, innocence, which is what I teach my students, my clients, and when I certify my coaches, the number one skill I teach is how to see somebody's innocence. Once I could see their innocence and my own innocence, once I could see my father's innocence, once I could see my mother's innocence, once I could see my own innocence, then how could you continue to hate? How could you continue to believe that there was anything but something holy going on? Right? Something that was merely miraculous and holy going on. And does it mean that I say it like this, just because I forgave didn't mean I didn't have to forgive again, right?
Sure.
So, when I got married, I had to forgive them again, because, here I am, a bride, and like my dad should be walking in my aisle and my mother should be here with me. And I remember just being overwhelmingly, in sadness because of that. And then when I got divorced, my mother should be here, right? My mother should be with me, right? So whenever I'm going through something, a large transition in my life, it doesn't mean I don't yearn for my mother. It doesn't mean that I don't, have a well of sadness that comes up, but it no longer paralyzes me. Instead, it really is a bittersweetness. It really is a recognition that we are here, I believe, and true or false, it doesn't matter, because it makes me feel connected and sourced and loved. But I do believe that was part of my path, that it was part of my destiny, that I was meant to do that, and my father was meant to do that. And I do believe that, I like to think of us as three of us as angels up in heaven, and we're sitting around going, what are we going to do next lifetime? And my dad goes, oh, I got it. Of course, he's not dad, and my mom's not mom, and I'm not me, right? But he goes, I know, let's do something really big. And we're like, yeah, let's do it, right? And my dad goes, okay, I'll be the bad guy this time. And we're like, okay. He goes, I got it. We're like, yeah, what? And he goes, how about if I do something, really bad? And hey, Rhonda, how about you? What about you help people master fear? And I'm like, really? Me? Help people master fear? What? And he goes, okay, but I'm going to have to do something really bad. And we're like, yeah, what? And he goes, I'll be the bad guy. I'll be the dad. Or you be the mom, and you be Rhonda, you be the daughter, and I'll kill you and, kill myself, and then you'll witness. And we're all like, yay, right? And, of course, we forget that, right? We forget the reason we're here. We forget our life's path. We forget that we agreed to this. Again, everybody doesn't have to agree with me on that, but it gives me solace, and it gives me comfort, and
Sure.
it gives me
Well, it's given you resilience.
Yes.
And that was the next question I had for you, and that was about the book Living Fearless, and how you're being able to conquer fear to the degree that you were able to, because we all still have fears no matter
Sure.
what. But what was the inspiration for that book? And so this particular you being able to master fear, or to look at this in a different way, is really how it contributed to your resilience. So can you talk about the book a little bit, and how you use that in your coaching business?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I love to do when I'm giving a talk or keynote or anything like that is I like to first ask people, support people in understanding that they do have fear. Because one of the things that I run into, Dr. Lena, is just like me, growing up in Upper Michigan and being Finnish and having no access to feelings, and nobody asked me how I felt, and I didn't even know how I felt. During those years of drinking, all those years I tried to kill myself, even after my parents died, and I lived up, got my own apartment when I was 16. I didn't think I was afraid. I would have never said I was afraid. I would have never said I was scared. If you would have asked me drunk on the ground, and said I was afraid, I would have looked at you like, no. So I believe that most people don't really have an understanding of how fear plays in their life. They don't actually know they are afraid. They don't actually know that fear is the cause. Because instead, what we've been trained to do is blame ourselves. We've been trained to we're lazy, we're stupid, we're procrastinators, we're people pleasers, there's something wrong with us. So instead of actually seeing it as all of those things as symptoms of fear, we see it as who we are. And so one of the things that I do when I do a talk, and I'd love to do it now if you're willing, is I read a list of what I call fear responses.
Sure.
And what I love everyone to do, if they're listening to us right now or watching us and they can shut their eyes, please do shut your eyes. If you're driving or something, please don't. But nod your head if you do any of these things or feel any of these things. So nod your head if I do any things or do any of these things or feel any of these things as I read them to you, okay? So do you ever deny yourself? Do you ever isolate? Do you ever pretend everything's okay when it's not? Do you ever hide out? Do you ever whine? How about settle? Compare? What about secretly manipulate? What about get defensive? Judge? What about complain? Procrastinate? Do you ever worry? Do you ever struggle? Do you ever wait and call it patience? Do you ever blame? Do you ever deflect? What about control? Do you ever feel bitter, entitled, powerless? Do you ever get resentful, guilty, disappointed? What about becoming a perfectionist or a people pleaser? Do you ever feel irresponsible, overwhelmed, ignored, getting caught in self-pity, annoyed, irritated like probably now, and victimized? So most people, when I read those words, Lena, I bet you know the answer.
Oh, sure.
Over 95% of the people have over 95% of the nodding their head. But in reality, most have close to 100.
Wow.
And so, right? So most people walk around the world having these experiences, whether it's a daily basis or weekly basis or monthly basis, but they're experiencing these things. And this is the thing that I believe is that what we do is the words that I read are what I call fear responses. What people label them as problems, character flaws. There's something wrong with me. Why can't I stop that? So they shame themselves, blame themselves, beat themselves up. So they don't see them for what they are. Instead, they become fuel for that, what I call the wheel of fear, the fuel for the wheel of fear to keep spinning around. Because if you continuously disempower yourself, if you continuously beat yourself up, then you're not going to have the wherewithal, the energy, the resilience, the ability to actually see the way out. You're not going to be able to even to see a blue sky if the clouds are out. And you think all these are clouds. You think the cloud is the sky, right? Instead of the sky itself. So we have not been trained. We have not been educated. We have not been helped people to understand that, no, these are all just fear responses. You don't get overwhelmed unless you have a fear. You don't procrastinate unless there's a fear activating that. You don't worry or blame or shame or compare or compete unless there's a fear underneath it. So when you can start looking at your life, when you can start looking at the things that we deem, most of us deem as problems, character flaws, etc., and start seeing them as fear responses, that alone changes the game, let alone realizing what you're afraid of. So most of us just think that we're afraid. I'm afraid of failure. I'm afraid of success. I'm afraid of rejection. And again, all those are fear responses. All those are fear responses.
It's interesting that you say that, because it seems like what you're saying is the first step is really identifying fear. Make peace with it. And having said that, I hear a lot lately, which I haven't heard 10 years ago, 20 years ago, people talking about imposter syndrome.
Yeah, that's
You
the
know,
latest
and
thing,
I'm
right?
like, where did this come from?
It's a handy term, isn't it? It's a handy
Yeah.
term.
So how do you coach people who say, I have imposter syndrome? Can you help me?
It's so funny that you said this. I was just getting interviewed yesterday about imposter syndrome. So that's very funny. So, so imposter syndrome, the other thing I hear a lot is I have worthy issues, right? I don't have self-worth. And when somebody comes to me and says, I have worthy issues, I go, no, you don't. I know that's what you think it is. I know that's what you think it is, right? But it's actually not that. And when people come to me with imposter syndrome, I just like I did yesterday in the interview, I said, that's just a fear response. That's just a label that you're putting on yourself to give yourself understanding about what's happening to you, right? If you tell me, oh, it's a worthy issue, and I can go, yeah, it's a worthy issue, then I think that I'm labeling it something, and then I have something to work on, right? If I have imposter syndrome, now I can work on imposter syndrome, right? And so imposter syndrome then, for many people, is what they think it is a worth issue. I'm not good enough. And what I teach and what I believe to be true is that I'm not good enough is a generic version of what I call the wheel of fear, because the wheel of fear is a personalized, individualized wheel that is particular to you. You have a particular wheel of fear. Now they all operate the same, but your components inside of it, the things that you name inside of it, what your core fear is, what your core negative feeling is, etc., is completely unique to you. Where versus for me, we might do some of the same things, but they're not going to be exactly the same. So when we say we're not good enough, that's great. That's a great first step because that's handy. But I think you and I both know that when we individualize it, it becomes more real, becomes more true, becomes more authentic, becomes more relatable. When it's just generic, it kind of becomes this handy dandy term, again, like imposter syndrome, worthy issues. Doesn't mean those things don't feel true. Absolutely feel true. Don't get me wrong. Those feel true. But it doesn't mean they're actually the reason and the cause and that they are true.
Interesting. So, in terms of the workplace, because many people that are going to be listening are leaders in the workplace, how does fear manifest in the workplace?
Yeah, everywhere, right? Everywhere.
I mean,
So
you do see it everywhere.
it's everywhere, right? So somebody,
Even with employees and with leaders. So it's both. And if you're both operating in fear,
that's right.
then it's a big clash
That's right.
because, yeah.
And it's so fascinating because, I look around the world with all the things I know about fear and working with so many people with their fear. And again, recognize that most people don't recognize they have fear. So that it's lucky that we are as healthy as we are in this society as, at the level we are. So, fear can show up in fear responses like bragging. It can show up as cutting people off. It can show up as disempowering somebody. It can show up complaining about somebody. It can show up. I have a perfect one that, coaches use. Coaches use I have to get better clients because my clients just, they're not really dedicated. They don't, they're not really getting it.
I've
They're
heard
not really
that,
working
yeah.
hard, right? And what I train my coaches to do is if you can't coach somebody, and again, I'm not going to say the 5% that may have, some mental illness or some neurological issue, et cetera, but most people, if you think that they're impossible to coach or that they're not ready to be coached or that they've got a problem or something, it's because you don't know how to coach them, right? So parents come to me, employers come to me, leaders come to me and say, oh, I've got to figure out how to fix them. I've got to figure out what to do about them. And I go, okay, well, wait a minute. If you understand fear, you as the leader, you as the parent, you, the one that's quote unquote here asking these questions, if you understand how your fear works, if you understand how to work with your fear, then you're going to see a very different world out there. The world changes. Instead of seeing Sally you think is lazy or, Jack who you think is not doing everything he could or, is too distracted, again, whatever you call them or label them, you're going to start seeing going, oh, they have some fears going on. Maybe they have a worry about a parent. Maybe they have a worry about their inability to produce in the way that they want to, or that you'd like them to. Maybe they don't know how to speak up, right? Maybe they don't know how to say yes or no. Maybe you don't know how to ask those types of questions and you just do demand, right? So having fear stops us from learning new skills, and it continues to help us blame people and shame people and think they're the problem, not us. So if you understand how your fear works, then you all of a sudden it gets really clear out there what's going on with everybody else. And when you identify your wheel of fear, what's really cool is you start identifying other people's wheel of fear. You start going, okay, Sally has a fear of incompetency. Okay, got it. Well, an incompetent trigger needs ABC. Okay, got it. Right? So it changes the way you look at people. It changes the way you interact with people. It changes the way you judge people. Mm-hmm. And so that you can take that all off them and start looking human to human, right? Human to human. You're having a tough day, I'm having a tough day. You had trauma, I had trauma. We both aren't the greatest communicators. Okay, got it. Let's figure this out.
Right.
But as long as you're wrong and I'm right, then you're the problem.
Yeah, you just said a mouthful right there. Understanding that people are people and we're in the same boat.
We're all in the same boat.
And having just a bit, and I was thinking about, as you were talking too, I was thinking about pastors that sometimes they have this perception of themselves and they need to change that perspective. And the whole thing about really good, competent leaders or leadership, in terms of having this show is about servant leadership, is being introspective constantly. It's a process that goes on a lot. And in leadership, we call it self-awareness.
Yes.
So it's really having that self-awareness and understanding your own deficiencies and weaknesses and accepting them.
Yeah. And you're saying something so important, because self-awareness is, we need it. We need to have self-awareness. But in order to be truly self-reflective, is that you must have the courage to reflect in a way that takes the first layer off, right? Like, you've got to be willing to go, oh, okay, wait a minute, this is me, right? You have to be willing to be wrong about, what I say is you have to be willing to be wrong about everything to find the right life for you. You have to be willing to be wrong about everything to find the right life for you. One of my coaches is a minister's wife. And she says to me all the time, oh my God, Rhonda, you bring the Bible to life. She always tells me when I give her a tool or anything, she goes, oh, that's a story. Okay, now you're telling me how to do this. And what she told me, now again, she's a minister's wife, minister for 30 plus years. She did the Bible studies. She did ran everything, ran so many of the programs. And she said, how many times did I hear from the pulpit, forgive, forgive, forgive? But not once was I told how to.
Interesting.
So when she learned the way that I help people, give them an exercise, that give them a work, an understanding of how to forgive, she said, I never knew how to forgive. I only knew that I was supposed to forgive. She goes, so you bring these concepts that we hear about in the Bible or in these, these spiritual tombs, and you bring it to like an actual human reality. How do you live it? How do you actualize it in this human reality? Instead of bringing it into just philosophy and just a concept, bring it down to earth. How do you actually forgive? How do you actually start shifting your opinion about something and someone? And so that awareness, like you talked about, is so critical. But I also think for many people, they want to be aware only so much, right? Because if you're really aware, you've got to have a level of humility, a level of surrender, a level of vulnerability, a level of being willing to be wrong on a regular basis, and a willingness to have daily forgiveness in order to open your mind, let alone open your heart to seeing people and yourself differently.
Absolutely. And then, of course, you have to take responsibility at that point.
That's right. That's right.
So that's what makes it difficult. I think people can get to a point where they understand things cognitively, but they don't actually get to the next step where they actually believe it.
That's right.
I understand it intellectually,
yes,
but I don't understand it emotionally.
Yeah.
And that's what we find in the church a lot too.
I love that. So it's like, yeah, they have an understanding. And so I have three daily practices that I teach my students and clients. And the first one is compassion, of course, right? Compassion, seeing innocence. And I always say to my clients and students, and when I train my coaches, I go, seeing people's innocence is a Jesus thing. Okay, so I'm just saying, practicing seeing innocence is a lifelong practice, right? I say, so compassion's first. Can you see yourself through gentle, kind eyes? Second thing is honesty, being honest with yourself. And I put compassion before honesty, Dr. Lena, because most of us, when we're honest with ourselves, are just ruthless. So I want you to be honest with yourself about yourself, but with compassion. And then lastly, I say responsibility. So if you look through with compassion, are honest with yourself, then with that level of compassion, that level of honesty, it is much, much easier. I'm not saying easy, easier to take responsibility. Because responsibility is the only way you can break the chains.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Let me ask you this. We were talking about fear, but some people would argue that fear is healthy. So what are healthy fears and what are unhealthy fears in your opinion?
I love this question. Thank you so much for asking it. So let's talk about the difference between physical fears and emotional fears. So physical fears, I'm afraid of snakes or I'm afraid of heights. That is an instinct to stay alive, right? You got those fears. I'm not going to try to, unless you want to start becoming a bungee jump expert, you don't have to go on a tall building, right? You don't have to do that. And you don't have to go to Arizona and be with the snakes if you don't like snakes. You don't eat. Most of the time, many of us, not always, can actually live most of our life not facing any of our quote unquote physical fears, right? Emotional fears, though, that's what people don't talk about, what they don't see. Everything I'm talking about today is emotional fears. The challenge is that the neurobiology of our body and brain doesn't know the difference between an emotional fear and a physical fear. So each one of them is to keep you alive. Our physical fear, don't like snakes, don't like heights, oh my God, I'm going to die, can't do it. And if you told me you were afraid of heights and I told you I was afraid of snakes, after the age of 25, we'd be like, oh my God, yeah, me too, right? Like it'd be no shame in it, right? Mm-hmm. But when you actually say, I have a fear of failure, or I have a fear of rejection, or I have a fear of looking lazy, or I have a fear of looking selfish, now, unless we understand how fear works, that can bring up a lot of shame and embarrassment. But what we don't understand is that fear of shame, that fear of selfish and that fear of lazy are what our body and brain and neurobiology created in order to keep us emotionally safe. Mm-hmm. Right? So once you start understanding that emotional safety and physical safety have the same death threat, so to speak, to our body and brain, right? The body and brain don't know the difference between you walking into a party and everyone's a stranger and you have a fear of rejection, right? And you're walking into this party, your heart will palpitate, you might start sweating, you might get a lump in your throat, right? You might start having rapid thoughts. Your body sensations might activate, right? Like you might have, thoughts, feelings, all these things happen to you. And unless we're aware of it, we're going to say, I don't belong here. Or we're going to say, well, this crowd isn't friendly. Or we're going to say something to let us out of going into that room, right? Mm-hmm. But when we understand it is just our body's reaction to our quote unquote fear of failure or fear of rejection or fear of looking selfish, etc., then we can go, okay, got it. And then that's why I've developed the Wheel of Fear and Wheel of Freedom, because the minute you can identify that you're on the Wheel of Fear, then I support you in shifting over to the Wheel of Freedom so that you can, in that moment, going to that party, you feel your heart palpitate, you start having those thoughts, your body sensations start activating, you can stop and go, this is not wrong or bad. This is just me. I'm having, my fear of rejection is coming up. Got it. Mm-hmm. What do I do instead? Get over my Wheel of Freedom. And your Wheel of Freedom has a whole path out of your fear so that you can then take a second, maybe go to the restroom if you need more than a second, and remind yourself what to do, what to think, what to say, etc. And then you can walk into that party more aligned with your true nature.
Interesting. Very interesting. So how can you tell what's the difference between fear and anxiety? because anxiety is a very prominent thing in our culture today, in our society today. How do you make the distinction, and when does a person need clinical therapy as opposed to coaching and going through the process of eliminating fear in their lives?
Well, first of all, you said something earlier that says we never eliminate fear, which I believe. We don't eliminate fear because it's part of our neurobiology. So what we do is we want to work with our fear. We want to understand our fear so that it does not own us. Instead, we can see it, that self-awareness that we talked about earlier, that self-awareness, so we can see it so that we can shift it, right? So that's going to be a regular thing. So I love the question about therapy because I'm a big person that believes in therapy. And one of my pet peeves with coaches is that coaches, are thinking they're therapists and they're not. and like now there's a whole strain of coaches like trauma coaches. It's like, no.
I agree.
Right? No,
I agree.
that is a no, right? If you're a trauma therapist, you went to extra training probably for years, right?
Absolutely.
And so I've been to trauma therapy a few times in my life, and no, do not go a coach for your trauma, right? If you want to learn some somatic exercises to support you to deal with your body anxiety, sure. But beyond that, no, you go to therapy. So when you are able to be in the present moment and you're willing to have that awareness and you're able to work with yourself, right? You're able to have a relationship with yourself in a way that you can work with your own thoughts, feelings, etc. Coaching, if it's a good coach, is going to be very helpful. If you're at a place where you're ruminating about the past, where you aren't able to get past something, right? You're still stuck in the past, or you're reliving an experience, like that trauma is still very active and alive in you. It's not coming up when you're, experiencing, like once every 6 months when you're experiencing something that has that same flavor, but it's an active daily thing or weekly thing, and I dare say even monthly thing to a certain extent. Then go to trauma therapy. Trauma therapy is fantastic. And there are many things in trauma therapy that can really support you. EMDR, internal family systems. There's so many good things. And all of those things, by the way, work tandem with coaching. I would say many of my clients go to therapy and work with me.
Yeah,
so,
makes sense.
they're going to the therapist for certain things and they're coming to me for other things. So that's the question about therapy. So I'm a big believer in therapy. And I train my coaches how to identify in their clients whether they need therapy or coaching. And I'll tell you one quick other story is I had a client come to me, and after just a few weeks, I knew she needed therapy. She did not need coaching. And she just had a really, really bad experience when she was younger. She was hospitalized, had a very negative opinion of therapy, like just could not like she was petrified of therapy. So I coached her for 6 months to move her into therapy. That was her coaching for 6 months. She not only went to therapy, you're going to laugh, now she's actually getting her PhD right now as a clinical therapist.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean that's the healing that can occur. So as I was coaching her for 6 months, it took me to move her into therapy. But we did a lot of the foundational work to get her prepared, and then when I finally got her to say yes, I helped her to go through the process of finding one. And like I said, now she's not only went and got her master's, now she's getting her PhD. She's writing her thesis right now. The next year she's going to graduate. And it's like, wow, right? Because that's what can happen, right? When we heal our wounds.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I love what you said about that and made that distinction, because a lot of people have, I think, a misinterpretation of what a coach is versus what a therapist does is very, very different.
Yes.
And it's important for people to understand that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
I like to
thank
think
you
of
for.
I think of coaches as somebody who can take you to move forward. Like if you got a
Absolutely.
challenge and you got to work through something, and you have a level of awareness that you can move forward, right? You're dealing with something in the present moment. And sure, maybe some of your past comes up. I'm not saying that it doesn't visit you, but you're dealing with something in the present moment. If you're dealing with something in the past, like I said, ruminating about something, that's therapy.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to ask you, and this is one of my personal questions for you because I think you're amazing.
Thank you.
You've been on Oprah Winfrey.
I have.
How did she hear about you in the first place, and how did that happen for you? That's almost like I see that as a God thing.
Well, it's
How did
totally a
that
God
door
thing.
open for you?
Yeah, no, it's a total God thing. Well, I'm going to tell you something that, well, first of all, nobody really asked me this question, so I love the question. So I very rarely tell this story. I think I've only told it maybe one other time. Is that the first time I was on Oprah was before I was a coach, before I was who I am today. When I was going through my own healing, my own transformation, when I was going through spiritual practitioner training, and I was actually in ministerial school for a year, and I was going through all this work. Again, going through therapy and trauma therapy, I realized that this is how I felt. This is how I felt for me. I felt that all these talk shows and everybody and articles and all this stuff out in the world was talking about everything. I mean, they would have somebody on talking about rape. They would have on somebody talking about incest. But talking about somebody whose father murdered their mother and committed suicide, no, nobody's having that person on,
Yeah,
right?
that,
So
yeah.
I actually wrote a letter to Oprah Winfrey and a couple other talk show hosts at the time, and I basically said, I have a secret, and it's a secret that literally nobody talks about. And I actually still have that letter, by the way.
Wow.
And I wrote the letter, and I basically said, I have the secret of secrets, so to speak. And Oprah had me on. So the first time I was
Wow.
on, I was a guest on her show to talk about my story. Then I went on later on as an expert and resilience expert, actually. She had me come on and work with people that had not been through what I'd been through, but been through tragic events that now they wanted to support themselves and work through things. So she had me on as a resilience expert. So yeah, the first time I wrote a letter. And then the next times it was because I had my book deal, my books and everything that they found out about me. And, but I was called, just for people who want to be on Oprah one day or want to be on a big show someday. I was called by Oprah many times and interviewed many times before I actually got on. So it was, it was like once they found out about me, they were looking for the right show for me. So they would call my publicist or call my publisher or whoever they went through. And then they would a producer would get on the phone with me, because there's, a variety of producers, and each producer is in charge of, let's just say there's 5 main producers, and each one's for one of the shows that day, right? Mm-hmm. And that person's in charge of finding the experts, the everybody for that show. They have to find everyone. And so they would talk to me, and what would I say, and what would I do, and how would I handle that? And they just kept on trying to find the show for me that was right for me. And the time I went on, the last time I went on, I think the producers called me like 3 times, because, they've got to make sure that you got it together.
Right, bring in those ratings. Yeah.
Right, that you're going to show up and you're going to be what you say you are.
Dynamic. Exactly.
And you're going to be who you say you are and be able to not freeze in front of Oprah, right? And the last time I was on Oprah, it was the year before she retired from her the Oprah Winfrey Show. I remember I went in there with my intention was, I'm equal to Oprah. That's what I said to myself the whole day. I'm equal to Oprah. And even when we were on break during the show, I was like, I'm equal to Oprah, right? Just practicing that mantra. That mantra's that Oprah's no different than me. Is no different than me.
Good for you. I mean, that's excellent. That's an excellent way for people to, when they get in the presence of what we call greatness, how do you respond to that? Don't be intimidated by that, because she's just a person, just like all the rest of us.
And I brought a support buddy with me, right? I brought a support person with me, right? Like, I didn't go there alone, right? I brought a support person with me, and I talked it through before I went on, in the dressing room, before I even got there, and I knew the 3 points I wanted to make. But again, I didn't know if she'd ask those questions, because they say, oh, you're going to talk about this, but you're not guaranteed that that's what's going to happen. Like, anything can happen.
Right.
And then I just kept on, I'm equal to her. There's no difference.
That's fabulous. I love that story. Well, you have shared so much wonderful information for our audience. How would they, if they want to know more, there might be people out there who are interested in being a coach because you certify coaches as
That's
well,
right.
right?
That's right.
So you have a coaching program as well as you actually coach individuals. So how would they, what's the best way for them to find out more about what you do and find out more about how they might want to access some of those programs and some of those training? And I believe you have something online as well.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah.
what is the best way?
So fearlessliving.org is my website, fearlessliving.org, O-R-G. And go there and you can find my books and you can find what I call the Fearless Living Transformation Program. That's my self-paced course that really takes you through the wheel so you can identify your wheels. Because there's 3 ways to get your wheels. The first one is you can get the book, read it, do it with a friend, and help each other get your wheels. Second way is the Fearless Living Transformation Program, which is the online self-paced program. And once in a while I teach that live, so you can always click onto that Fearless Living Transformation and see if I'm teaching it live. I just finished teaching it, so I'll be teaching it in the next couple months. And then the third way is to hire a coach, a certified Fearless Living coach. So go to fearlessliving.org, and then I'd love to give a free course to get people started. So go to fearlessliving.org/risk, R-I-S-K, fearlessliving.org/risk, R-I-S-K. And you're going to put your name, your email in, and it's going to let you into the platform, and you're going to get access to my course called Stretch, Risk, or Die. And it takes, it's one of my clients' very favorite tools. And it basically shows you how to achieve your dreams. It takes you out of procrastination. If you're stalled anywhere, feel stuck anywhere, it's going to show you how to break through that. And then it's 3 15-minute videos. And then the third 15-minute video, I actually explain the Wheel of Fear. So you're actually going to see me talk in detail about the Wheel of Fear. So get on over there to fearlessliving.org/risk, R-I-S-K, put your name, email in, and get in there. It's 3 15-minute videos. You can do it today. You can do it today, right? And there's worksheets, there's templates. So you're going to have everything you need in order to start using this model today. And companies use it, churches use it, individuals use it, because you start being able to talk about goals and dreams inside the organization as Stretch, Risk, or Dies. And it creates a whole new level of understanding about what you're about to accomplish.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Rhonda, for being on the show. You've shared some amazing information, and I really appreciate you doing that.
It's been a pleasure. And just remember, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just fear. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just fear.